As if taking inspiration from the legendary rock band Genesis, the Biden FBI appears to be turning it on again when it comes to bullying and cajoling social media to censor our posts online. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV, and here's the story. The Federalist's Shawn Fleetwood, no relation to the band Fleetwood Mac, reports that even as the Bidenistas await the Supreme Court decision in Murthy v. Missouri, the Biden FBI is turning on their tax-funded censorship machine. Quote, on Monday, May 6th, Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, told reporters that federal agencies such as the FBI and Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, restarted discussions with big tech platforms. According to NextGov/FCW, this coordination will focus on removing disinformation on their sites as the November presidential election nears. Warner claimed these talks resumed in March. Around the same time, oral arguments in Murthy v. Missouri, which centers on the Fed's censorship efforts, were heard before the U.S. Supreme Court. End quote. Ah, yes, discussions. It sure is nice to see how creative some tyrants and fascists can be when reframing and renaming their use of your taxes to silence you. MRC-TV readers and viewers no doubt know that Murthy v. Missouri centers on doctors such as Dr. J. Bhattacharya and other signers of the Great Barrington Declaration. Those people, by taking legal action against the U.S. government, already have helped expose the U.S. government's unscrupulous and widespread attempts to besmirch the Great Barrington signers, the signers' traditional approach to viral outbreaks, and their opposition to lockdowns. Of course, regardless of whether the Great Barrington signers were right, and they were, the principle of free speech here is at stake. And it is a principle that stands regardless of whether the information we express is valid or invalid. Fleetwood notes that an FBI representative confirmed the information Warner provided. Quote, the FBI remains committed to combating foreign malign influence operations, including in connection with our elections. That effort includes sharing specific foreign threat information with state and local election officials and private sector companies when appropriate and rigorously consistent with the law, the representative claimed. In coordination with the Department of Justice, the FBI recently implemented procedures to facilitate sharing information about foreign malign influence with social media companies in a way that reinforces that private companies are free to decide on their own whether and how to take action on that information. End quote. Yeah, we only have Section 230 hanging over your head in the FCC. Yeah, cudgel, scythe, everything's cool, everything's fine. Which is nearly a clone of the previous operation conducted by the FBI, which literally gave Twitter millions of dollars after it played cozy with FBI requests to censor during the Hunter Biden information scandal and during the lockdown insanity. And of course, it was conducted on a broader scale going back to 2016. When the Dems and Rhinos used their Russian interference canard to push the Portman-Murphy Countering Foreign Propaganda Act. I and a handful of other reporters were trying to warn people about that as the bill was sliding around the slippery halls of Congress, and it passed in the final National Defense Authorization Act that Barack Obama signed as president, handing the Department of Defense $150 million for 2 years to shovel to other federal agencies and eventually to private or nonprofit interests that would censor us or pressure social media to do exactly that. So, Donald Trump put a 2-year pause on the program, but it has returned with Biden. And since that time, the corrupt funding and excuses of fighting foreign influence have grown so numerous and so insanely opposed to free speech, it's valuable to recall some of the most egregious. For example, in the first week of March 2023, journalist Matt Taibbi and others detailed key parts of what have become known as the Twitter files. Those files, released by Elon Musk after taking control of the corporation and as he rebranded it X, showed the world that the feds had been using our tax money to silence us. As I wrote March 7th, 2023 for MRC-TV, quote, Taibbi shows readers how the Portman-Murphy Act was connected to an almost simultaneously issued March 2016 Obama executive order establishing what was called the Global Engagement Center, GEC. And a bit of digging shows us that this itself was an Obama spin on something he started in 2011 with an earlier EO. As the official GEC website reveals, GEC's founding traces back to 2011 and the Executive Order 13584, which established within the Department of State the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communications, CSCC, for the purpose of supporting agencies in government-wide public communications activities targeted against violent extremism and terrorist organizations. Executive Order 13721 in 2016 transformed the CSCC into the Global Engagement Center, but left its counterterrorism mission largely unchanged, which isn't really true at all. As Taibbi notes, when Portman-Murphy was rolled into the 2016 National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, the bankroll permitting the GEC to begin a 2-year propaganda campaign against innocent American and others worldwide was laid out. End quote. And of course, the feds want to keep this up, even as the Supreme Court weighs arguments in a case citing just that kind of wrongdoing. Fleetwood notes, quote, CISA External Affairs Specialist Tess Heyer declined the Federalist's request for comment on whether the agency has resumed discussions with social media companies to combat what it claims to be disinformation. But she said that CISA Director Jen Easterly will be participating in an election security hearing in the coming weeks, end quote. It warms the heart, doesn't it? Yes, indeed. The FBI and likely CISA and who knows how many other Biden agencies are going full bore, turning on their censorship machine until they're told to stop by the Supreme Court. Writes Fleetwood, quote, neither the FBI nor CISA responded when pressed on when they restarted communications with social media companies on efforts to remove posts containing so-called disinformation from their platforms. The FBI and CISA did not identify the specific companies they're working with on such efforts. Neither agency provided an answer when questioned on how they determine what constitutes disinformation or what other federal agencies they're collaborating with in these efforts to have disinformation removed from social media platforms, end quote. And Fleetwood also reminds us about the on-again, off-again injunctions against this kind of federal speech suppression. Going into the judicial system, he writes, quote, U.S. District Court Judge Terry Doughty issued a preliminary injunction in July 2023 barring federal agencies from colluding with big tech to censor posts they don't like. In his ruling, Doughty wrote, if the allegations made by plaintiffs are true, the present case arguably involves the most massive attack against free speech in United States history, end quote. Yes, that was a memorable quote. One wonders whether the FBI will allow us to share it very soon. And writes Fleetwood, quote, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals subsequently upheld Doughty's injunction in September. While the initial ruling did not pertain to CISA, often referred to by its critics as the nerve center of the federal government's censorship operations, the court later issued a corrected ruling to prevent CISA from colluding with big tech to squash free speech online. The U.S. Supreme Court, however, lifted the Fifth Circuit's injunction in October, effectively allowing the federal government's censorship operations to resume while it considered the merits of the case, end quote. It sure is great to consider the fact that your rights are left to the mercies and hubris of government security agencies, to the mercies and hubris of the FCC, which holds the sword of Section 230 of the 1996 Telecommunications Act over social media, and of course, left to the mercies and hubris of those who populate the halls of so-called justice. Yes, the mercurial and often ill-informed minds of politically appointed judges. In this land of the free, you're free to speak, as long as people feeding off your toil say you're free to speak. The Supreme Court is expected to issue its ruling in Murthy v. Missouri in June. So until then, enjoy being policed on social media. Yes, you fellow foreign influence peddlers. And boy, we would hate it if you shared these videos far and wide on social media. Please visit us inside Facebook, even as the FBI might be watching. And please check us out, of course, on Rumble for our videos where they're not censored. We're still available at YouTube, where, yes, we do get censored. And, of course, you can find us on TikTok, on Instagram, and on Twitter/X. Just look for MRC-TV. If you want to find me, you can find me at Gard Goldsmith on Twitter and at Gardner Goldsmith on Gab. And of course, we hope you'll visit MRCTV.org every day. Open up a new tab, head on over there and see what the whole team is doing. And please consider donating to the Media Research Center to help the whole team do its work. Thank you for watching, one and all. For MRC-TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.
I want to invite you as my guest on a very special, once-in-a-lifetime, 7-day post-election cruise in the Caribbean. It's going to be a blast.